Hi, Jason Sulliman here. Wanted to talk to music majors and music teachers as we gear up for that final push through the end of the spring semester, the end of the academic year. It seems to be a time of year where everybody's stressed out and everybody just kind of goes a little crazy with what's going on. And so I wanted to offer some insight as to how we kind of should address this and maybe think about it. My undergraduate was about 20 years ago, give or take. About 20 years ago, I was in school. And I wanted to talk a little bit about technology because I think that that's a big player in what we're really talking about right now, and I'll explain why in a second. So 20 years ago, I did not have a laptop computer. I did not have a cell phone. I had an email address, but email wasn't ubiquitous. It was not an official form of communication through university channels. It wasn't that thing. It wasn't something I had to check every day. It just wasn't a big deal when I started my undergraduate degree. And that's a very different time than what we're living in right now. The students nowadays, you have your laptops, you have your tablets, you have your smartphones, you have email, you have Facebook, you have Instagram, you have Twitter, you have all sorts of different platforms of communication for various, utility. But one of the things I think that creates, the easy part of the conversation is to say, all right, the difference between that time and the difference between now is that many of my students probably spend between 1 and 2 hours a day doing various things on various social media platforms, what have you. Now, good, bad, or indifferent, that means that they're spending about 2 hours less practicing, doing their homework, doing the things that I would have done as a music major at the time that I lived. And so, on the one hand, it's very easy for me to have the standpoint of saying, you're just not getting your work done, you're not working hard enough, you're just not getting it done. But I think that there's more to the situation here in terms of really getting stressed out at this time of year. When I was a student, you went into a practice room, and the only way you were going to get distracted at that point would be if somebody else came into that practice room and talked to you, or you left that practice room and then went to talk to other people. Like you went to like a lounge area and started talking to people. But for the most part, you go into that room and you're just going to practice. Like, that's it. That's how it goes. If I wanted to listen to a piece of music, I would have to go to the music library. I'd have to check out the CD or the vinyl, maybe even the cassette, and listen to it. And that was it. And at that time, there was much more of an environmental setup towards single tasking, just focusing on one thing and doing one thing. And unfortunately, nowadays, the environment is set up to where it's constantly breeding multitasking. But the problem with that is that human beings are not actually multitaskers. All of the research in cognitive neuroscience shows, to some level or another, that we're not actually doing two tasks at the same time if we're doing two different things. What happens is we toggle from one task to another task, and we go back and forth. Now, some people are better togglers. The research shows that the more pathways you have in the corpus callosum, which connects left and right brain, the better you are at toggling back and forth. Women tend to be shown, according to the data, to be better than men. For the most part, anecdotally, I would agree with that. I am a horrible multitasker, but the truth is, none of us are multitasking. I should instead say I'm a horrible toggler. But I think part of that is because the way that I grew up as a young music major fostered single tasking. There just wasn't a platform in place of checking in with multiple things or focusing in my energies in different directions. And so as we gear up towards the end of the semester, one of the things that I'm noticing here, as well as other schools that I've taught at, and in different regions and different states, is that right now it seems to be a very stressful time for a lot of my music students. But I think part of that is because there are all these major assignments and juries and final concerts and papers to write. And there are all these big capstone, assignments and tasks that require a tremendous amount of time that you need to put forth just towards that one thing. For example, if you need to write a paper and it's due on Thursday and today's Tuesday, or we'll use a better example, today's Wednesday, you have a paper due on Friday, you're going to start it tonight. That means you've got to spend a lot of time today and tomorrow writing that paper, a lot of time essentially single tasking. And the concept, like the effort toward focusing on one thing and just doing one thing, can be extremely stressful and extremely draining for people who live in an environment that never requires that. So I think part of the stress of the 21st century undergraduate music major is the need to still develop single tasking. And that's something that you don't have to do on a regular basis. You can get away with, toggling back and forth. I have kids that check text messages during a lesson. Now, I can advise them that that's a poor decision, but that's what we live in the 21st century. We're constantly connected. And I think the biggest issue that I've noticed with that is that to be an effective music major and to tackle those things that we have to tackle when we're learning our craft is that you have to single task. There are times where you have to go into a room and you have to focus on nothing other than the instrument and the music you're trying to make for a half an hour or for whatever period of time. And that means that since you have to do that, and then you got to go to an orchestra rehearsal later, there's a time where you're going to have to go sit down somewhere and write a paper. And you have to focus just on that paper. And that's a really hard thing to do. So for students right now, if you're an undergraduate music major and you're experiencing just an insane level of stress because we're at the end of the year and everything just seems to be piling up, know that it's gonna be like that because, in part, you live at a time in an environment where your degree and your choice of career path requires a tremendous amount of single tasking, yet your environment doesn't really afford you a tremendous opportunity to develop that. You have to seek that out on your own. And so if you've gotten to this point in the year or this point in your college career where you haven't really developed that, that's probably why you're experiencing the level of stress that you are. So my suggestion to you would be, as you go through the year, make it a point, be mindful that at some point in the day, in the week, in the month, you have to develop chops towards single tasking. You have to set small attainable goals with not checking your email, with not checking in on Instagram, with not responding to the notifications on your phone, and focusing just on the one task at hand. As you develop chops toward that, when you get toward the end of the semester, where you then have to go write a big paper, or you have to go and practice for the jury, or you've got to learn all your scales for your barrier, like whatever you have to do, you'll be a little bit more prepared to handle that type of rigor. Right now, that type of rigor is very foreign for many of the 21st century students. I don't mean to generalize, so egregiously. But if you are, let's say, a younger teacher or an older teacher for that matter, and you're teaching undergraduates, know that they grew up, or they're growing up in a different environmental landscape than you did. Take that into consideration. And I'm not saying that that means we need to, give everybody free passes, but if we try to educate from the standpoint of recognizing and respecting that that is a challenge that needs to be addressed, that might change the way that we try to teach our students. It really just dawned on me this year, and so one of the things that I'm going to do next year is periodically through the year, I'm going to make sure that I'm addressing the concept of single tasking and the concept of being mindful toward one thing and one thing only, and developing that as a skill. There was a time where we didn't have to develop that because that just kind of came for free. That's just the nature of the environmental constraint of being a music major in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. But now we have to actually go back and make sure we're plugging that into our curriculum, whether it's implicit or otherwise. So if you're freaking out right now, don't worry. Deep breaths, check out my micro breaks page, make sure you're taking care of your body, but you'll get through this. Realize, though, that this is something you're going to have to address and you're going to have to develop chops for as you go toward the future. And if you're a teacher, try thinking about it from this standpoint and imagining the differences in the environmental landscape between what it's like to be a music major now versus when we were music majors. And make sure that your teaching is addressing those differences. Make sure it's handling the trade-offs that come from all this increased technology. All right? Semester's almost done. Final push. Let's all do it together. Thanks.